Key point 1. Difficult conversations should not always be an ugly experience. While describing difficult discussions as an everyday challenge, the authors likened uncomfortable conversations to holding a hand grenade. If you're too scared to hurt other people's feelings, you could hold on to an unpinned grenade. Alternatively, you could throw it tactfully or emotionlessly without remorse. Regardless of the way you choose to go about this, casualties are inevitable. Remember, overly suppressed or displayed emotions could turn a simple altercation into months and years of conflict. However, if you look closely at every ugly experience you've had while engaging in a difficult conversation, like requesting for a pay raise, taking your children out of their stance to do the complete opposite of your instructions, firing an employee, and so on, you will discover that they all obey the same structure. Decoding this structure is vital to how much control you have in these situations. We need advice that is more powerful than be diplomatic or try to stay positive. Douglas Stone, Bruce Patton, and Sheila Heen. In this guide, you will see the 3 conversations embedded in every difficult conversation. The first, which is the what happened conversation, relates to the initial bickering by the opposing parties on the true source of the disagreement. Here, there is an intense or subtle discussion on what could have been done better, who is to blame, and what is the hidden truth in every word spoken. The second conversation is the feelings conversation, where we dissect our true feelings, decide to hide them, confront them, and expose them. And the identity conversation, which is the last, is an internal debate on the consequences of the disagreement or the outcome of the difficult discussion. In this stage, we examine the impacts of our words and reactions, and those of the second party on our image, future, and well-being. Difficult conversations will help you become more relaxed and knowledgeable in terms of speaking to people. Everybody should have a chance to build strong relationships with others and be able to communicate all ideas and opinions without fear of being confronted. This summary is your opportunity to become a conversation master who makes people understand your words. Key point 2. Arguments stop us from exploring other people's side of the story. Arguing in itself is not the problem, as every human has a unique way of seeing things. From time to time, there's no way or ideas won't clash with others. We argue over the best place to shop, the best movie, or the right color to paint the room. However, arguments in complicated conversations come with anxiety, fear, anger, and resentment because the argument resonates with topics into which we have invested a chunk of our emotions. You get spooked by the mere fact that people are blind to the truth of your argument. You ask, why is John or Sarah hell-bent on doing or believing the wrong thing? You tag these people as selfish, stubborn, irrational, and controlling because they choose to contradict what you have come to see as the truth. Instead of exploring what information the other person might have that we don't, we assume we know all we need to know to understand and explain things. Douglas Stone, Bruce Patton, and Sheila Heen. One thing you know, however, is that you're always the right one, that your idea is the logical solution, and anyone who doesn't see things the way you do is wrong. This tendency suggests that your ideas and beliefs are born out of past experiences that have taught you to do things a certain way. The same is true for the individual that relies on a school of thought that contradicts yours. As such, there's no one side to an argument. Both parties are basing their arguments on a vantage point that validates their actions. In other words, both parties are right. Remember, every difficult discussion has elements that we have chosen to remain blind to. To avoid arguing blindly, you should choose to see things from other people's perspectives. Listen to and understand their side of the story before drawing your conclusion. Once you adopt this practice, you will see that people tend to compromise when other people acknowledge and understand their arguments. Key point 3. Assumptions entangle intentions and impacts. Assumptions are an integral part of difficult conversations, as they often determine the outcome of the conversation. So it is imperative to understand that assumptions are baseless hypotheses about the true intentions of someone else's actions. Remember, intentions are nothing but the true motivation for an action, which would remain a mystery since we cannot access other people's thoughts. Unfortunately, there's no way we wouldn't hypothesize the motivation for actions that impact us badly. The trick is to remember that there is little truth to your assumptions until proven otherwise. If you're the one at the receiving end of the accusation, you should know that every accusation contains elements of an attack on your intentions and the impact of your actions. Choosing to resolve the accusation and not acknowledging the consequences of your actions would prolong such hostility. Therefore, you should accept that your words or actions, regardless of how good your intentions were, have negatively affected the other person's feelings. When we think others have bad intentions toward us, it affects our behavior, and in turn, how we behave affects how they treat us. Douglas Stone, Bruce Patton, and Sheila Heen. Likewise, an open approach should also govern discussions that would normally lead to a blame game. Individual A is certain that they are right, and so it is only fair that individual B should carry the blame. This discussion framework is what the authors call the blame frame, and it does little to resolve or find the real source of the problem. People that are more concerned about the culprit would overlook the broader scope of the issue, which is more important. Rather than blame your secretary for her sloppiness, you should instead focus on the string of events that might have caused the screw-up. You should also identify the ways you could have contributed to her actions. Were you too hard on her? Or do you make it difficult for her to ask questions that would make her work easier? Once you discover your subtle contributions to the problem, it becomes easier to relate to other people's plight or shortcomings. Did you know? Your brain prepares your facial muscles to laugh upon hearing another person's laughter. Key point 4. Feelings are an integral part of a difficult conversation. Feelings are vital to the well-being of relationships, and they also come to play when two or more people are looking to talk about delicate topics. While this is a given, we often hide from our feelings because they could either make us vulnerable or hurt other people. Similarly, those who feel comfortable about showing their emotions often do so at the expense of their relationships. Although hiding from emotions that drive our words or actions is the path many choose, it is never the right approach to resolving an altercation. You must have noticed that canned feelings eventually spring up in an ugly or embarrassing way. It could spur you to respond with rage to a non-issue. In other cases, bottling up while engaging in a difficult conversation could make you blind to the real problem, or push you to engage in the blame frame instead of the contribution system. To avoid this scenario, it is imperative that you tactically share your feelings. Before this, it is essential that you fully understand the spectrum of your feelings and how it contributes to the issue at hand. Getting everyone's feelings on the table, heard and acknowledged, is essential before you can begin to sort through them. Douglas Stone, Bruce Patton, and Sheila Heen. Exploring the spectrum of your feelings entails that you discover the implicit rules that govern your thoughts. Here, it is important that you come to grasp the emotional footprint, which determines the type of feelings you're comfortable acknowledging and sharing. Also, you must realize that it is normal for good people to brood over bad thoughts. Remember to learn to value your feelings as much as you do other people's. Furthermore, it is advantageous that you know the attributions, judgments, and accusations are not your feelings. They are blinders. They hide the real truth and make you focus on external factors rather than the inward focus that would inevitably damage your relationships. You could sidestep this pitfall by channeling the urge to blame to a more promising strategy of finding clues that would show you what you're feeling. More importantly, in the process of expressing your feelings, avoid passing judgments as opposed to acknowledging that your feelings are just one side of the whole story. Therefore, the authors advised that you use the words "I feel" when sharing your thoughts. Key point 5. Identity conversation and its many quakes. As stated in a previous chapter, identity conversations are internal discussions we have on the consequences of our arguments with others. We all have unique identities that we use to gauge what people think of us and how they see us. Therefore, we often tend to ensure that nothing, not even our actions or words, tarnishes our established identity. As a result, we fixate on the revelations, bordering on our competence, our worthiness, and character that would emerge. You might ask, will my will to fight for my goal infer that I'm self-servicing, hence contradicting the unselfish image that you've always tried to portray? And so, you keep quiet and avoid discussing the importance of your goal. More so, an attack on your personality would naturally spur you to choose a defensive strategy, or you could choose to return the favor. Remember, feedback that attacks our identity could leave us vulnerable, and this might trigger a denial or exaggeration phase. People that are in denial ignore negative feedback. They believe that such notions are nothing but biased comments that should not define who they are. People that tend to exaggerate the relevance of feedback would accept criticism to a fault, and this would encourage them to see themselves through the critical view of other people. Clinging to a purely positive identity leaves no place in our self-concept for negative feedback. Douglas Stone, Bruce Patton, and Sheila Heen. You could resolve these sorts of identity quakes by first acknowledging that you have identity issues. Secondly, you must come to terms with the diversified nature of your identity. There's no such thing as a notion that perfectly boxes the entirety of your identity. You have a myriad of feelings that have led you on a unique path. As such, it is the diversity of your emotional footprint that surfaces as your identity. Bearing this in mind, you will start accepting the propensity to make mistakes from time to time, that your intentions are not as simple as they seem, and that your inactions and actions have contributed to the problem you're about to discuss. As such, it becomes easier to engage in difficult conversations because you're no longer trying to control people's perceptions. Likewise, you become prepared for responses that would normally come as attacks on your identity. Key point 6. How do you begin a difficult conversation? Once you've figured out that it's important that you initiate a discussion on a sensitive topic, it is vital that you set things in motion the right way. Starting a difficult conversation is the most stressful aspect for people. Nailing this stage would make the subsequent parts of the conversation smooth and effective. Your first sentence could get the entire discussion out of control, especially if you start focusing on your perceptions. As such, it is advisable to start the conversation from the third story. In other words, initiate the discussion by assuming the position of a mediator. Next, acknowledge the varying views that have complicated the issue while enumerating that both parties should work together to resolve the problem. This approach doesn't necessarily mean that you understand the other person's intentions. In contrast, this approach is viable because it tells the other person that you are aware that your story is not the prevailing factor in the conversation. In a scenario where you're not the initiator of the conversation, or if your counterpart had initiated the discussion by attacking your identity, you could respond by utilizing the third person's story to diffuse the tension. The third person story is what an outside observer would narrate of your situation. Regardless of how easy this might sound, the art of listening is not a walk in the park. Listening entails that you channel your feelings into a curious mode. You know that you're hurt, but you have managed to route your internal conflict to focus on the motivation of the aggressor. It is, however, more viable that you divulge your thoughts as politely as possible when you're finding it difficult to switch to a curious mode. Remember that one of the advantages of listening is that people tend to afford you the same courtesy. The art of listening entails 3 skills: inquiry, paraphrasing, and acknowledgement. The skill of inquiry would help you know how to ask important questions while avoiding those that might come out as sarcastic statements. Paraphrasing, on the other hand, shows that you are attentive. Your paraphrased version of what the other person has stated would assure him or her that you understand them. The last, and perhaps the most important skill, acknowledgement, helps you establish that you care about a person's arguments, and it is normal for them to feel that way. Key point 7. Learn how to express yourself. When it comes to expressing yourself while being engaged in a difficult conversation, it is crucial that you understand that you deserve to be heard. Understanding this important fact will help you realize that the price of keeping quiet is costlier, irrespective of the substantial risk that expressing yourself entails. Failure to express yourself in a relationship will likely stifle the dynamics of the relationship. However, you should note that expressing oneself has its challenges, and you should effectively portray your thoughts less provocatively. The first thing that this entails is that you start expressing yourself by pinpointing the most important thing, what matters most to you. Secondly, you should explicitly say what you mean rather than using subtexts or subliminal messages. Thirdly, in your quest to make yourself understood, do not oversimplify your thoughts or intentions. To achieve this, you should never mask your conclusion as the truth. Remember that there are two sides to every story. In contrast, you could portray your conclusion by identifying the things that might have spurred your insight. More importantly, you should always ensure that you are understood. While you or the other person is expressing the important facts that could have complicated the situation, ensure that the conversation maintains the logical path to proffering a viable solution. As such, you can lead the conversation by reframing every statement, which could derail the whole process. If your conversations are going to get anywhere, you're going to have to take the lead. Douglas Stone, Bruce Patton, and Sheila Heen. For instance, if the other person is hell-bent on blaming you, you could counter this by relying on the contribution system where you acknowledge what the person is feeling and still assert your thoughts. You could also make known the dynamics of the conversation by revealing the action or the words that might stifle the effectiveness of the discourse. After both parties have expressed their thoughts, the next step is the resolution phase. The first thing to note here is that reaching a compromise would require you and the person to find a meeting point. It is essential that you address missing information that could change the outlook of the conversation and incorporate the power of persuasion. Reveal the things that could persuade you to reach a compromise, and ask for the things that could convince them to reconsider their decision. Conclusion. You have little power over what people think of you or the way they judge your actions. One of the things that you can control is how you respond. You could stoke an already tense situation, or you could learn to listen and react appropriately to the pressures that come with the engagement in a difficult conversation. Our psyche tries to protect us from being hurt, and that's why people become so defensive once you've said something that triggers their negative reaction. You may think that your behavior is not aggressive, but you never know a person's background and why specific words call a certain response. For instance, you tell your friend that their clothes are dirty after the rain. You intend to help a friend by pointing out that there's something wrong with their outfit. Girls usually appreciate when their companions help them out this way, because who wants to wear stained garments all day long without even knowing about it? However, there is a chance that a person whom you pointed out the fact of dirt on the clothes will become irritated. They can perceive it as an attempt to humiliate them. Maybe their parents or classmates used to bully them by picking on their appearance. So the best way to avoid conflict here will be to avoid taking an individual's reaction personally and explain that you only meant to help. The art of conversations is challenging since you have to be open and calm most of the time. A person who's good at sustaining effective communication is able to analyze their emotions and think before acting on them. Try this. Acknowledge that what you believe to be other people's intentions are nothing but assumptions. With this in mind, you should approach difficult conversations knowing fully well that the other person has their side of the story to tell. When someone insists on accusing you wrongly, try changing the conversation by telling the story through a third party's viewpoint. This will enable both of you to instantly see where you're wrong.